Well, hey, Key City Church, we are so glad to be here with you all tonight. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes, but we wanted to just go ahead and say welcome. Make yourself at home in that chat. Go ahead and say hi to people. Let us know you're watching, and we will get started in just a few minutes.
Yep.
Let's do it. right. Hey, Key City Church, we are so excited to be with you all tonight. Merry Christmas to all of you from myself and the rest of the Key City team. We so wish that we could be celebrating in person with you this year, and we are sure you're having that same tension in your own life with your families, but we're so glad that we can be able to celebrate with you virtually tonight, and we cannot wait for the day when we get to meet you all in person. Tonight we're going to be celebrating Christmas. We're going to be sharing the vision. We're going to be singing some Christmas songs, and we're just going to have a great time. I'm excited for what you're going to share with us today. And I think it's going to be a good time.
I'm excited too. And just to clarify, we're not going to be singing Christmas songs.
We're not? I thought this was my big break.
Go for it.
No, we recorded some Christmas music live earlier, so it's pre-recorded. It's kind of a contradiction to live, I suppose.
We recorded it live.
We did.
It was live when it was recorded.
It will no longer be live in that sense. But we're going to roll into that now. A big thanks to that team for doing that, and we just wanted to make sure to respect the COVID guidelines, which is why we're not doing it now. But we hope you all enjoy.
Herald angels sing, glory to the new
Well, hey, Key City Church, we are so glad to have you here with us this evening for T-9. And the reason that it's T-9 is because we are 9 months out from when we are planning to launch weekly in-person services. And we are so happy to have you here with us tonight. And if you were here with us last time for T-10, then you might remember that we said that although we don't really believe that Frederick needs another church, what we do believe is that Frederick needs more churches that are willing to do everything short of sinning in order to resist the things that have tended to make churches irresistible, in order to reach those who have walked out, who have walked away, or have chosen never to walk in the first place. And whether those are people that you know, or maybe that's you, I think the reason a lot of people have walked out and have walked away is because I think there's so many people out there who were introduced to a version of faith, or grew up in a version of faith, or were handed a version of faith that presented them with a version of God. And the God that they saw, what they saw when they saw what that God was like, what they found was a God that they didn't really like. And maybe that's you. Maybe you grew up in some version of faith, or were handed a version of faith, and when you were presented with what that version of faith presented God as being like, you found that you didn't like that version of God. And maybe for you, that God was a God who just wanted you to abide by the rituals, that the version of God that you were presented with was a God that just wanted you to do the right things, to press the right buttons, to check the right boxes in order for him to be happy with you. Or maybe for you, the version of God that was handed to you, the version of God that you were told what God was like, was a version of God that just wanted you to follow the rules, who was always snooping around after you, who was always checking in on you and checking up on you to make sure that you were doing what you were supposed to be doing. Or maybe the version of God that you were presented with, the version of God that you grew up with, was a God that was like a God who just always wanted you to do better, that no matter what you did, it was never enough and it was never good enough. And you found that you were never good enough. Chances are it was some version of God who had a list of boxes that you were supposed to check off, something that you were supposed to line up to, something that you were supposed to measure up to. And it was a God that never really was that pleased with you, that you were never felt like you were fully able to satisfy, that you were running after and found yourself getting burned out and left behind. And so you walked out and you walked away. And if that's the God that you were presented with, or if some version of God like that was the God that you were presented with, that you were told this is what God is like, then no wonder you didn't like that God. And who could blame you? And try as you might have, or pretended to, or wanted to, or intended to, you just couldn't bring yourself to like that version of God. And of course you did. Of course you didn't, because it wasn't the kind of God that you could actually like. But what if? What if what God is actually like? What if what God is actually like is nothing like the God that you were presented with? What if the God that you walked away from, or the God that you lost faith in, was a God that you were never supposed to have faith in the first place? And what if by walking away from that version of God, the God when you saw what he was like, you found that you just couldn't like him? What if, in walking away from that God, you were actually looking for what God was actually like? And what if, in walking away from that version of God, find that you are more open now to interact with, to find, to discover who God truly is, what God is truly like. Because what I believe, when God saw you walk away from the version of God that you were presented with, there was a silent fist pump in heaven because God knew now you're open to see what he's truly like. And what I believe, you might be surprised to find, is that when you come in contact with, when you encounter what God is truly like, you just might find that you actually like him. And so we're going to start where the whole story starts. We're going to start with the Christmas story and how thankful I am that we have access from the eyewitnesses of the life of Jesus to the Christmas story. And it's from one of those eyewitnesses, a man named Matthew. Matthew, who was a Jewish tax collector who lived 2,000 years ago, who collected taxes from his fellow Jews on behalf of the Roman Empire and was looked at as a traitor because he was collecting taxes on behalf of this empire that was seen as a foreign invader, an occupier of the land of Israel, and people hated him. They looked down upon him. They despised him until one day Jesus approached him at the tax collector's table, and he looked Matthew in the eye. He said, "Matthew, come on, follow me." And Matthew got up and left everything and followed Jesus and spent 3 years following Jesus and learning from Jesus. He saw Jesus' death, and he was a witness to the resurrection of Jesus and gave his life for the testimony that he wrote about Jesus. He gave us the account of Jesus' life. And he writes about Joseph's perspective of the Christmas story. Joseph, who was engaged to Mary when he found out that Mary was pregnant. And he was planning to do what most people would do. He was going to break it off and walk away because, she had apparently been unfaithful because it wasn't him, and he didn't have anything to do with that. And why is my fiance now suddenly pregnant? And so Joseph had in mind to break it off and walk away when one night in a dream, an angel appeared to him and said, Joseph, look. I know you don't want to go through with this. I know you want to walk away from this. But the child that is conceived within her is conceived by the Holy Spirit. And then the angel quotes the prophet Isaiah and says that the virgin will be with child, and the child will be born and known as Emmanuel, or God with us. And so Joseph wakes up from this dream and surprises everybody by not just writing it off to something he ate and going ahead and signing the divorce papers, but Joseph decides to go ahead and take Mary as his wife. And it's Luke who picks up the story there. Luke, who was lived 2,000 years ago, who was a physician, who was a companion of the Apostle Paul. Paul, who had once persecuted followers of Jesus before he became a follower of Jesus and was instrumental in the growth of the early church over the first half century. Luke was his traveling companion and learned about Jesus from Paul. And then Luke took it upon himself to write up an account of the life of Jesus. So Luke went and interviewed the eyewitnesses, the people who were still alive, who'd grown up with, who knew, who saw, who followed Jesus. And he wrote up an account, and it's Luke who provides us with the most details from the Christmas story. And it's Luke who says that an angel named Gabriel appeared to Mary as well, and told Mary, hey, look, you're going to have a child. I know that you don't think that you have any need to go and get a pregnancy test, but you are going to give birth to a child, and you're going to give him the name Jesus, which means God saves. Because you're going to give birth to this child, and this child is going to have the throne of his ancestor David, and his kingdom will never end, which even when Luke wrote this 50 years after the life of Jesus was a presumptuous claim to make. But now, 2,000 years later, looking back at this kingdom that has grown and grown ever since, it's just what happened. And then Luke gives us the detail. He says that in the time of Augustus Caesar, that he decreed that there'd be a census taken. And he says it was during the reign of Quirinius, who was governor of Syria. And this is Just Luke's not so subtle way of saying what I'm talking about actually happened, and you can go back and check the history books to verify it. Fact check me. I double dog dare you, because what I'm telling you actually happened. And Luke says, so Mary and Joseph, because of the census, traveled to their ancestral home in Bethlehem to stay with relatives there, we assume, as well as all the relatives that they had that had moved away from Bethlehem. All of them had returned to Bethlehem to be counted as part of the census. And because there were so many family members that were staying together, there was no room for Mary and Joseph, so they had to sleep where the animals were kept. And it was there that Mary went into labor and gave birth to a child who was named Jesus. And then Luke shifts our attention from the main storyline to a group of shepherds who are out in a field. And so Luke is telling us that here is this promised child, this miracle child who has just shown up. And the first people that God decides to tell, the first people, God, like, here is this miracle that just happened, that God said would happen, and nobody knows. And the first people that God chooses to tell are not the religious elite. It's not the religious leaders. It's not the powerful or the influential. The first people that God chooses to tell is a handful of shepherds out in a field in the quiet of the night. And these shepherds, they go and they find Jesus in a feeding trough, wrapped in swaddling clothes, just as the angels had told them. And so here's Joseph, and here's Mary, and here's a handful of shepherds that might be making this stable smell worse than it already did. And oh yeah, and here's God with us. And I think we've heard the Christmas story so many times that it doesn't shock us that more at just how unbelievable it is. Like, if you were going to make up a story to convince people that God has come into his own creation, if you were going to make that up, would you ever make up this story? Right? As unbelievable as that story is for us today, it was just as unbelievable 2,000 years ago. I mean, if you could just imagine that you never heard the Christmas story before, that you never heard about Mary and Joseph and Bethlehem and shepherds, if you'd never heard any of it, and you found yourself at a party and somebody had the brilliant idea to play a game where everybody said, hey, let's all come up with our own ideas of how we think God would come in to his own creation, and we'll put the ideas in a hat, and then we'll read each idea and vote on who has the most likely idea for how God would come into his own creation, right? And so everybody writes their ideas down, and they pick out the first one, and it's like, well, I think that he's going to come, and there's going to be like thunder everywhere, and lightning, and volcanoes, and just like all of these natural disasters, because God's going to get everybody's attention. Everybody's like, that's a pretty good one. And then somebody's like, I think he's going to show his face on the sky like a teleprompter for everybody to see him and hear him in this undeniable, unforgettable way all at once. And everybody's like, that's a pretty good one too. And then somebody else is like, I think he's going to be born to a teenage, unmarried mom in a shed, and there are going to be some farmers there too. Like, who is voting for that one? Right? Like, who would make that up? And I think the fact that this story is so unbelievable is one of the things that just makes it so believable. Because it's not something that anybody would make up. If somebody were going to make up a story about how God came into his own creation, it was going to be shocking and memorable and unforgettable. This isn't the story they'd make up. It's just too unbelievable. And I think it's what makes it so believable. And as unbelievable, and perhaps because of that, as believable as what happened is, what's even more incredible is why it happened. And to find out why it happened, we look at John's version of the Christmas story. John, who was a follower of Jesus, who followed Jesus for his entire 3-year ministry, who saw the death of Jesus, who saw his resurrection and risked his life because he saw the resurrection of Jesus with his own 2 eyes. John, who has spent his life thinking and reflecting on the life of his friend Jesus and took it upon himself to write up his own account of the life of Jesus. John provides us with his version of the Christmas story, and it's so different from Matthew's version and so different from Luke's version that we don't even tend to consider it the Christmas story. But John gives us his version of the Christmas story. And he says it like this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Greek word that he uses for word is the word logos. It means the underlying fabric of all reality. John's saying that in the beginning was pure reality, and it was with God, and it was God. John's saying this word that I'm telling you about, it is the God that is beyond and behind and above and responsible for all things. And what John says next should just take our collective breath away. It should just cause us to pause, because what John says next should be the lens through which we see the entire Christmas story, the lens through which we see everything that happens next. In fact, it should be the lens that colors how we read the entirety of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And it should become the lens through which we see all of life and reality. And it's the Christmas story in 4 words. John says, the Word became flesh. That the Christmas story is not about God giving or God sending. It's about the God who is beyond and behind and above and responsible for all things. The God coming in to his own creation in flesh. And John says, and we have seen his glory. And John's saying, this isn't something that we heard about. This isn't something that we were raised to believe. This isn't something that was passed on to us from somebody else. This isn't something that we overheard in a conversation. This is something that we saw with our own 2 eyes, and we have staked our lives on it. We claim this not because we have anything to gain. We claim this while we have everything to lose for claiming this. I spent 3 years walking with, talking with, and learning from Jesus, and I saw him crucified, and I saw him raised from the dead. And I'm telling you that my friend Jesus was God in flesh. That the God that we so easily lose track of, that we so easily lose sight of, that we so easily forget what he's like, become mixed up with another version of God that is so unlike Jesus, a God that we end up not even liking. But that God, the God, came into his own creation in flesh to show us exactly what he is like. And John says, let me tell you what he's like. He is full of grace and truth. And truth is from a Greek word that just means the uncovering of something that was covered. It's the making known of something that was previously unknown. That in Jesus, God has revealed to us something that we had missed, something that we'd misunderstood, something that we thought that we got, but we didn't really get. He had made known to us what we couldn't have known before, what we didn't know before. He was making something clear to us. And what he was making clear to us, he was making known to us, what he was revealing to us, is that he is full of grace And grace is God's unmerited, unearned favor. It is the acceptance, the love, the welcome, the approval that comes from God that cannot be earned. It cannot be worked for. It cannot be achieved. It is the unearned, unachievable, and unlosable acceptance and love of God. That God has come in the person of Jesus to reveal to us that God is full of grace. And grace says, there is nothing that you can do that will ever make me love you more than I already do. And there is nothing that you can do to make me love you less. Grace says, I love you just as you are, not as you should be. Grace says, I love you despite your past, despite your present, and despite your future mistakes. Grace says, I know this has been a difficult year. Grace says, I know you've lost a lot. Grace says, I know you're struggling. I know you've walked out. I know you've walked away. But trust me, I have not walked away from you. Grace says, you might have lost sight of me, but I haven't lost sight of you. Grace says, you might find yourself letting go of your faith, but I haven't let go of you. Grace finds you right where you are and loves you and accepts you and is willing to be right there with you. Grace is God saying there's nothing that you can do to ever be separated from my love. Grace says you might find yourself in the wilderness now, but this is just where you're going to find me and fully understand my grace. That it cannot be earned, it cannot be achieved, it cannot be groveled for. It is given freely to everybody, always. And this is what is so scandalous about the grace of Jesus. It's scandalous because it's given to everybody, always. Jesus extends grace to the religious hypocrites as well as the teenage prostitutes. He extends grace to the atheists and the agnostics. He extends grace to the corporate criminals and the blue-collar workers. He extends grace to corrupt politicians and the man on the corner and your middle-class next-door neighbor. He extends grace to the broken and shattered, the scarred and the broken. And he extends grace even to you and to me. God's grace is what Jesus came to show us what God is like, that God is full of grace. And as John would later on summarize even more succinctly, that if Jesus came to show us what God is like, then God is love. And not a far-off, distant love that says, I'm for you, but don't expect me to do anything for you. A love that comes in to his own creation, not in power, not in might, not with force or intimidation, but a God who comes in the quiet of night, low and gentle and humble. A God who comes gently to us, that we would feel safe enough to come to him. A God who reveals himself not to the high and the powerful, but to the shepherds who are far off. A God who invites into his friendship the sinners and the tax collectors, the prostitutes, those who are far off from God, those who thought that they'd been forgotten by God. Those were the ones that liked Jesus. Those who were nothing like Jesus liked him. And Jesus liked them back. and through his whole life. He never leveraged his power to force or coerce or to intimidate, but he used his power only ever to heal and provide and protect and restore, and then ultimately set aside his power when he was nailed to a Roman cross to show that he would never, never use his power against us, that he is a God who will never, never be against us, even when we're nailing him to a cross, that he won't lift a finger against us. He will always be a respecter of our freedom, and he will always allow us to have our own way, to show us that he's gentle and he's humble and he's full of grace. God came in the person of Jesus to show us that he is love. And when we see what God is like, we realize that he's a God that who wouldn't like? I mean, if we could create a God of our own making, I think that we would make a God that looks like Jesus, a God who extends grace to everyone, always, a grace that frees us to let down our guard, to open ourselves up, to understand who he is, to see his love, and to know that he is for us, and to trust him. And by trusting him, to freely align with his way of love. That the God that we like, we ultimately become like, that we learn to love the way that Jesus loves. We become people who learn to leverage their best for the best of others. And through Jesus' love, we change, and the world changes. This is why Jesus' closest followers, his disciples, the 12, the ones to whom Jesus told that he was going to build his church and nothing was going to stop him. The ones to whom Jesus told to love one another as I have loved you. To whom Jesus said, the way that the world will recognize that you are my disciples is how you love one another. His followers, who Jesus told, go and make disciples, go and make students, go and make followers of all nations, teaching them everything I've commanded you, teaching them my way of love. His followers, who in doing that started the very first church. His followers recognizing that Jesus is the full revelation of the love of God, of the goodness of God. No caveats, no footnotes, no exceptions, that God, as he's revealed himself in the person of Jesus, is completely good. This is why his disciples started the first church and was focused on and fixated on and founded on the person of Jesus, and revealing to people the goodness of Jesus and the grace of Jesus and inviting them into it. And it's why Paul said that he claimed to know nothing except Jesus and him crucified, that Jesus was upheld and exalted and was pointed to by the first church. And it's what made the church so irresistible. Because who wouldn't want a God who loves everyone always? Who wouldn't want a God who is never going to be against us and is always, always going to be for us? The early church who said, let us put nothing in the way of those who are turning to Jesus. Let's put nothing in the way to make it difficult for those who are turning to Jesus. Let's remove everything. Let's resist everything that could potentially make the church resistible, so it'll be easy for those who are turning to Jesus. The first church, the early church, was founded on, fixated on, and focused on Jesus. Because who wouldn't like a God like that? And they called it the good news. We believe that it's the good news still. And what we find is that those who are walking out of and walking away from or choosing not to walk into churches in the first place, the vast majority of the time when they give their reasons for why, it never has anything to do with Jesus. In fact, most of the time, they'll affirm that they like Jesus, that they love who God has revealed himself to be in the person of Jesus. They just don't like his church. They like Jesus. They've just been burned out by religion. They like Jesus. They just can't keep up with the rules. I mean, they like Jesus. They just don't understand the purpose of the ritual. They like Jesus. They've just been hurt and let down by his church. That those who have walked out and walked away, what they want, what they long for, is the God who's revealed himself in the person of Jesus. And this is why, like the first church, Key City Church, our number one commitment is to Jesus. Because we believe that God has revealed himself to us fully and completely in the person of Jesus. And he's a God that anybody would like. And our desire is to become like him and express the same love and the same grace to the entire onlooking world. That we would be a church that accepts everybody always. There's nothing that anyone could do or believe, choices that they would make that would separate themselves from the love of God, that anybody who came in contact with Key City Church would experience the grace and the love and the unconditional acceptance of Jesus. Because it's in the soil of grace, it's in the soil of unconditional acceptance that human beings are freed to grow in to the people that they were always meant to be, freed into their God-given potential, free to trust Jesus and follow him fully. And this is why we exist. This is our mission. And this is why we will always stay committed to Jesus, that we might become irresistible as the church once was. And the church that changed the world might change the world again. Will you pray with me? Father, I thank you so much that this Christmas you would remind us of who you are, of exactly what you are like. And you are exactly like Jesus, a God who is full of grace, of love, unconditional acceptance. And I pray that you would help this church, this body, to grow into a community that accepts others unconditionally, that accepts everyone always, that they would be freed into their God-given potential. And I pray, Father, that this Christmas, that hearts would be open to see you afresh, to see you with new eyes, to see what you are actually like and be awakened to the fact that we actually like you. And maybe even want to become like you. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Oh, come, all you unfaithful, come, weak and unstable, come, no, you are not alone.
Well, hey, Key City, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was an absolute blast. Getting to observe it for me was fun. To the worship team, thank you guys so much. That was such a privilege to listen to. Thomas, thanks so much. for
Yeah,
that
I mean, the
message.
worship team, they were incredible.
Yeah.
So thankful for them.
Yeah, so thankful for them. Thankful for the very small team we've got in the room with us tonight for making it happen. And thanks to all of you. You know, it is such a privilege to get to do this, and especially to do it with all of you and all the people that are forming in this community. It's so fun for me to see, and I know you feel the same way.
Yeah, this
about
is
that.
awesome. We're just so thankful for you guys.
We really are. And hey, we want to let you know that there's some next steps you can take. If you watch this today and you're saying, hey, like, I think I want to get a little more involved. Maybe you're looking for a church, or maybe the magical Facebook algorithm sent you this video, and had anyone looked over your shoulder, you would have clicked off quickly because you would never be caught dead in a church. But something about this made you curious. If you're in any of those camps and you just want to stay up to date with what we're doing at Key City, you can go to keycitychurch.org, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the website, and just fill out the form to get emails. We promise we won't email you all the time, but that is a great way to stay up to date with what we're doing here. And just to know if this is something you want to do, you can keep getting more information. You'll be able to know when we're doing our next one of these as well. But maybe you listened to this today and you said, not only do I want to be on the email list, but I'm ready to join the team. I want to be a part of what's going on at Key City. Well, first of all, welcome. Hey, we're so glad to have you, and we're honored. If you want to get involved with Key City, we are beginning to form teams. We are now 9 months away from launch, and that sounds like a long time, but in that run-up, we are going to be forming these teams. Those teams will lead to groups that will be connecting ahead of the launch, and we've got a lot in store for the next 9 months so that we can launch all ready to go in September. So if you want to join a team, you can go to keycitychurch.org and hit Get Involved. If you do that, you'll be able to fill out a form and let us know what kind of team you want to be involved in and how you want to serve. We would love to get to do this with you. It is such a blast, and we can't wait to meet you soon. Well, everyone, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Merry Christmas. We hope you all have a wonderful Christmas.
Merry Christmas.